and salutations. We are here to celebrate, commemorate Juneteenth, 2026. That was the sound of the conch shell, known for Caribbean history for sounding the alarm, sounding a call. Today we sound it for emancipation, which is still coming. They said a people without the knowledge of their history are like a tree without roots. But I ask, what happens when the roots are still there, yet the stories are forgotten? What happens when the books are closed, the memories erased, the names unspoken, the wisdom unclaimed? For knowledge is more than information. Knowledge is foundation. Knowledge is the architecture of our bones, the bones of our culture, the bones of our community, the bones of our civilization. Knowledge is a memory carried from grandmother to grandchild, from elder to youth, from the drum to the heartbeat, from story to story. His story, her story, our story, our story. The stories that tell us who we are and how we came to be, and to what we owe those footsteps that made our journey possible. These stories form the neural pathways of our humanity. They are the map of our becoming. And so I invite Miss Eureka Huggins Axum, Wisdom Keeper for Adasi, African Diaspora Ancestral Commemoration Institute, who has long before Juneteenth become a national holiday, been developing a tradition teaching us how we might honor our ancestors, honoring our ancestors whose struggles, sacrifice, resilience, and vision made even our presence here today possible. And so I invite Dr. Eureka Huggins to take us through the libation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson, and greetings to all of the guest speakers and those who are tuning in. Today we pour libations. Libations, as you may know, is a ritual carried over from our African roots. It is practiced throughout the diaspora. It is a acceptable way. It's not the only way, but it is acceptable way of starting any important event. You've seen it at Kwanzaa ceremonies. You've seen it at many others. You've even seen brothers who may be hanging out on the corner, and one of their homies may pass, and they open up a bottle of liquor and they drop a couple on the earth, and they say, "Here's for the homie." That's support. That's their way through memory of pouring libations. But it is an offering of water. Sometimes it is alcohol, clear liquid. It is an offering to those ancestors, and we're thanking them for the good deeds that they did while they were on planet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour it. Since the space is a little bit limited, I'm going to pour it into a plant. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we call on our very first ancestor, the Creator. Mother, Father, Supreme, Creator, God Almighty, Creator of the heavens and earth. We call upon you. We call upon the divine ones. We call upon the guardian angels and the guides. We want to call upon you. And I'm going to pour the water into the plant, if you can see it. We call upon you. We thank you for this day. We thank you for your guidance. We thank you for your protection. We thank you for moving us forward. We thank you for putting circles and fiery walls of protection around us every day. And we thank you for good health and happiness. We ask that you continue your blessings. We ask that you provide prosperity, good health, divine, and help us to fulfill our divine purpose in this lifetime. We take this time also to call upon your individual ancestors who are guiding you, and you can call their names as I'm pouring the water into the plant. I call on my ancestor Yunelka Morris, Vernon Huggins, Mervyn Morris, Joyce McCullin. Please call on your ancestors, those who have done the good deeds, and thank them. We're offering this to them. So we call on all of our personal ancestors. And now we have time to also call on our collective ancestors, our community ancestors, those who have fought for us, those who have fought the hard fight, who came before us. We call on our freedom fighters. We call on Harriet Tubman. We call on Sojourner Truth. We call on Frederick Douglass. We call on Benjamin Banneker. We call on Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey, Dr. Martin Luther King. We call on Queen Nanny of the Maroons. We call on Zumbi. We call on Queen Nzinga. We call on Queen Wanteteleke. We call on Kwame Nkrumah. We call on Cyril R. James, George Padmore. We call on Kwame Ture. We call on those scholars, those fighters who worked so hard to restore our history. We call on Dr. John Henry Clark. We call on Jacob Carruthers. We call on Asa Hilliard, Charles Finch. We call on Patricia Newton, Dr. Francis Cress Welsing. Call their names. I'm inviting our panelists to call their names, those whose shoulders you stand on, to join us and to continue to acknowledge us and to guide us and to protect us. We want to call on even Bob Marley. We definitely want to call on John Russman, who we're having a conversation about today. So we call on all of those ancestors. We want to thank them. We thank them for their guidance. We thank them for their protection. We ask that they continue to work with us, to inspire us, and to help us to move forward. We end by saying, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. When we call on the ancestors, when we disconnect ourselves from the ancestors, we disconnect ourselves from the source of our power. But when we remember the ancestors, we begin to draw upon their strength, their courage, their wisdom, their determination. We begin the healing process. We begin to restore our memory, and we begin to restore our AI, our ancestral intelligence. We begin to remember that we are divine. And so I thank you so much for this opportunity today. And I say peace, love, and blessings to each and every one of you. Have a joyful Juneteenth Day. Thank you so much, Dr. Nelson.
I think you're
Oh,
muted.
you're muted.
Thank you. And so we bring our conversation by answering the question, who exactly was John Brown Westrom? It's not a name that's popular, but it's a name that we certainly want to make more well-known. Born a slave, yes. John Brown Westrom's story is itself a story of emancipation. Born in Port Antonio, Jamaica in 1799, he was the son of a white merchant father and an enslaved Black Jamaican mother. Thus, under the slave laws of the time, a child's status generally followed that of the mother, meaning that John Brown, as he was first known, entered the world under the harsh realities of a slave society and was born a slave. The story is told that his path to freedom was secured through the intervention of his father's wife, who persuaded his father to provide him with his name, Russworm, and to ensure he had an education and opportunities that would otherwise have been unimaginable for a Black child, a Black boy in that time and place. So he arrives in 1812 in Maine with his father and his wife, Susan Blanchard Russworm, who insisted that he be acknowledged as a member of the family and given the Russworm name. Talk about an ally. So he grows up, and somehow the father, I guess he dies, and she remarries. And in 1824, he enters Bowdoin College. What makes the story remarkable is that he was a teacher before he actually entered Bowdoin, because he studied at Hebron Academy and taught at a Black school school for Black children in Boston before returning to Maine. And again, it was his stepmother, Susan Russworm, who was now married as Hawes, to William Hawes, efforts that he was enrolled at Bowdoin College. He went on to graduate from Bowdoin College and co-founded in 1827 Freedom's Journal, the first Black-owned newspapers in the United States of America. At the time when enslaved Africans and the Black people faced severe restrictions on education, political participation, access to public life, he understood a simple but powerful truth. Freedom requires knowledge, and knowledge requires voice. So he and his co-founder, Samuel Cornish, understood that their mission was revolutionary because it was created at a time when Black peoples and their stories were routinely misrepresented, ignored, or spoken about by others. It was thus that they declared in their inaugural issue, "We wish to plead our own cause. For too long, others have spoken for us." And today, those words resonate with us. We therefore honor John Brown Russell, a Jamaican migrant, a Jamaican slave, who is part of the story of the Juneteenth story here in America. Recognizing that Juneteenth is not simply a celebration of emancipation from physical bondage, it is also a commemoration of the ongoing struggle we have for knowledge, opportunity, citizenship, and self-determination, including the right to read, which was denied us, the right to learn, the right to tell our own story, the right to imagine and shape our own future. And so with that, I asked Commissioner Cheryl D.B. Murphy to tell us a little bit more about what the Frederick Douglass Commemorative Committee did. She's part of the national movement, and I like to call it the state of the movement. Give us some words about what they're doing now and where does it stand today in 2026.
Cheryl? Yes, I'm here. Pleasant good afternoon, family. First and foremost, let me apologize for my car presentation. I'm here in Brooklyn trying to support our brother Horace with his program here at Brooklyn Tech. So I ran outside in the car because it's much too noisy in the school with the drumming and thing. But I'm here, present, and so excited. Happy Juneteenth, everyone. 161 years for Juneteenth. Yes, we are here celebrating Juneteenth, and as we say at the nation, all things Juneteenth, all things Juneteenth. We are an international organization. First, we started out as national, but we have chapters in all 50 states, as well as Africa now, Ghana, and just recently, they just celebrated in South Africa the 50th anniversary of the uprise, the youth. And for the first time in South Africa, we raised the Juneteenth flag. So we are making miles and just spreading the culture, basically living on the legacy of our founder. He always said Juneteenth National Observance Foundation is to bring all Americans together to enjoy our common bond of freedom through recognition, observance, education, historical preservation of Juneteenth in America. And our founder is Reverend Ronald V. Myers, MD. He was out of Mississippi. He traveled all over United States trying to start the movement, getting each state to be a leader, a delegate for the Juneteenth Nation. And as you know, Juneteenth is a celebration that, how should you say, it's remarkable how things happen. We always have to honor our Buffalo Soldiers because our Buffalo Soldiers left the shores in Virginia, heading to New Mexico. But actually, a storm came and the ship landed in Galveston. And when the Buffalo Soldiers arrived in Galveston, they heard that there were still some enslaved Texans 2 years later after President Lincoln signed the Emancipation in 1863. So in 1865, when they arrived in Galveston, they could not let this actually continue. So the General Order 3 was created, and by Ranger, he was in charge of the Buffalo Soldiers, and he placed the General Order 3 on the Remy Church in Galveston, Texas, on Juneteenth, 1865. And it was also Father's Day. So Juneteenth and Father's Day is very, very closely knit, as well as Sickle Cell Day. So it's all of these holidays that coincide with 6/19, which is very, very special. And we continue to move the movement forward. Here, I present to you the Juneteenth flag. We have our Federation flag from our awesome, awesome Marcus Garvey in 1920 with the red, black, and green. But this is actually the Juneteenth flag that was created by a Connecticut brother, Ben Hayden. And this is the Juneteenth flag. And the colors are red, white, and blue. It represents the Texas for the star. You see the blue represents the horizon, meaning new beginnings. And the traditional flag always has June 19th, 1865 on it. And as we continue to move forward, the struggle is always there. The fight continues because, as you see in America, the injustice that we continue to see happen every day. But the Juneteenth Nation, we're always out there lobbying, trying to get laws passed, always contacting our senators, our House representatives, because those are the ones that make our laws, and we always have to be in contact with them. But again, we always remember when you celebrate your Juneteenth, remember our veterans, because without the Buffalo Soldiers, there would not be any Juneteenth. It was because, like I said, they landed in Galveston and couldn't have this continue. Our Texan folks still being enslaved. So that's basically how Juneteenth started, 1865, June 19th, and we are here 161 years later, 2026, the struggle continues. Never give up the fight. One love as we celebrate Caribbean Heritage Month. Yes, I'm the flag lady. We celebrate Caribbean Heritage Month because, as you know, there were plenty Caribbean Buffalo Soldiers back there. And I can truly say one of my uncles, Ronald Thompson, was one of them. So we're all linked in. We only came on different shores, and I am a proud Bermudian. And my family came to United States in 1906, and we are still here in Jersey City, making waves and being community service and always being a public servant. So that's what we are taught to serve. That's what we come here to do, to make a difference in the life. And that's what I will continually do. Raise all my flags very high. Happy Juneteenth, family. 161 years. Acheo. And
Thank
now
you
I'm going
so
back to
much.
my program.
Now you can go back and please give everybody in
Yes,
Brooklyn doing their
because they
first
tell them
Juneteenth
save my
event.
seat. I'm coming back.
Yes, it's their first Juneteenth event. I'm very happy that the Caribbean Society of New York is doing their first Juneteenth event in Brooklyn.
Yes,
It's live
yes,
and direct. And so I
yes.
should have been there, but I thought, a lot of people are on the country aren't doing anything. So I really want to make sure that I had a space if people want to join. And this is going out. So hopefully if they didn't join today, they can get a sense of it afterwards. So
Exactly.
here we are.
And big up Dr. Claire. You're always waving the Caribbean flag high. I love you. You know that from 2006. We love you when you come to Jersey, and I always will love you and big up all of the work that you do. You are our champion. You are our Shiro. Asheo to you.
Thank you so
Long
much.
live Dr. Claire.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
And
So
to the panel, have a great day.
yeah, thank you. So we're going to go straight into our conversation today, which is looking at emancipation still coming and what does it mean? How will we have knowledge, equity, and justice? And of course, other people ask me, what do I mean by that? But when we see artificial intelligence increasingly influencing what information we see, what knowledge is valued, and whose voices are amplified, then we see our challenge remains as relevant as ever. Who tells our stories? Who decide what is worth knowing? Whose histories are preserved? Whose voices are heard? And one of my friends says that, it is such that artificial intelligence, if any of you have a chance, and after this event, I want you to do that. I want you to go in and ask a question relevant to your work around and something to do with slavery, because I was just looking for material on John Russwurm. Now, if I did not know the history already, right, I would have gotten a very sanitized version. So I said, no. I said, no, you cannot. I don't want you to soften it. He was a slave. I don't want to hear. So he said, oh, yeah, you're right to push back, blah, blah, blah. and it still came up with some very soft language. And I said, no, this is BS. I want you to give it to me straight. So I'm having this conversation with this machine. Hopefully we'll learn something from it. But my point is, if I didn't know, I would already know, I would have not gotten the full story of who John Russell was and how his history came to be. And this actually proves my point. And so I want to open the conversation with these words as a story weaver. A new intelligence is emerging. It learns our words, it studies our images, it consumes our books, it absorbs our questions, it listens to our conversations, it gathers our histories, it reigns in our dreams. But does it know our wisdom? Does it understand sacrifice? Can it feel memory? Can it hear the silence between the words? Can it understand the journey from bondage to freedom, from exclusion to dignity, from survival to possibility? Or does it simply learn the patterns without knowing the meaning? For we are Homo sapiens sapien, the species that knows that it knows, the species that remembers, the species that imagines, the species that asks why. Artificial intelligence, AI, may become augmented ignorance if we forget who we are, if we surrender memory, if we abandon wisdom, if we allow machines to become curators of stories they did not live, keepers of truths they do not understand, and authors of futures they cannot imagine. And so with that, I want to introduce the panel. We have with us today Dr. Monique L. Agassi, who is the author of a book, AI Unveiled, and a film. We have with us Dr. Shauna Knox, who is the architect of a company called Emancipation Game, an educator. We have with us Dr. Curtis Charles, who is an AI expert, who single-handedly made the effort to drag the Caribbean into the AI conversation when he served as the principal of the campus in Antigua and Barbuda. He's back with us on this side of the world, continuing his work. And of course, we have Dr. Kwasi Konado. And so I'm just giving you a brief interview, but I want to ask each of them to start us off with our central question from their perspective. And these people, believe you me, were carefully picked. I did not just run up and down and say, I'm arbitrary people. I really wanted to have a conversation to help us in the marketplace, because none of us on this side of town are necessarily AI experts. And when I came up with the idea of this idea of knowledge equity, I was kind of playing with a fear I can't even properly name, but that was expressed to me today when I tried to get the information on John Russell. I mean, it was giving me this very sanitized story. It's exactly what my fear is. So I want to ask each of you, and I'm going to begin with Dr. Agassi. I'm going to go with you first, and then I'm going to go in alphabetical order. No, but okay, A, then C, then K. All right. So I'll go with Dr. Agassi to get us started. From your perspective, this concept of knowledge equity. I haven't read your book, but certainly I know you have something to say. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes to kind of set the stage for us from where you sit and what that could look like based on why you chose to do a film about AI Unveiled. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. First, I want to say good afternoon and thank you, Dr. Nelson and the Institute of Caribbean Studies for convening this important dialogue in observance of Juneteenth, the National Caribbean American Heritage Month. And I wanted to say that in the 19th century, struggles over the freedom revolved around the literacy, newspapers, and access to information. And here we are in the 21st century, those same struggles increasingly center around algorithms and artificial intelligence. And I pushed the needle even further to question, and even in my book, if this could indeed be a modern day new technological form of neo-colonialism within AI as well. So the accounting principle of Sankofa, as we know, teaches us that we must go back and retrieve what is valuable from the past in order to move forward wisely. innovation without memory is dangerous, as we know. So the question before us is not whether AI will transform society, but the question is whether justice, equity, and human dignity will guide that transformation. And I definitely believe that that has definitely led to the inspiration behind my book AI Unveiled and the documentary as well that's out now, which I'll be presenting at the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center tomorrow in Cincinnati, Ohio, from 5 to 9. So it's definitely has been inspired by that, but also my book on AI Unveiled and Techno Bias to Solutions Within Education and Beyond is definitely a simple but a profound question, and that is who gets to define knowledge and whose humanity is reflected in the systems that we create. Now, as an educator and a filmmaker and a scholar, I recognize that many conversations about AI were taking place without sufficient attention to history, culture, justice, and the voices of historically marginalized communities. So the work of John Brown Rustrom inspired is very inspirational as well, because he understood that self-representation matters. And so with that being said, and we all know that I believe that the communities must have the power to tell their own stories rather than have their stories told for them. So I see a parallel in the age of AI. The algorithms increasingly shape the information that is inoculated into the colonial imaginary, as Dr. Clement Akasis argues, and opportunity and even perceptions of reality, and therefore the struggle for representation has not disappeared, but rather it has simply entered into this digital space. So my book was also influenced by the Afrocentric tradition of Molefi Asante, who endorsed my book, the father of Afrocentricity at Temple University. And he emphasizes, there's definitely an emphasis on agency and Carter G. Woodson's commitment to historical consciousness, as well as W.E.B. Du Bois and his vision of education as liberation. All of this challenged me to ask whether communities of African descent would become subjects in the development of AI or merely objects of its consequences. So
can I stop you there?
Yeah, yes.
Let's go on to the next entry point. So let's go to Dr. Charles to give us an entry point from his perspective as a technology maven. Dr. Charles.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So you should be seeing on my screen. First of all, happy Juneteenth to everyone. But you should be seeing on my screen a quote that is phrased that the problem I wanted to talk about as an educator and a technologist. I wanted to talk about the intersection of these two things, right? And I think as a Caribbean native Trini, I wanted to make sure that we understand the context within which we operate in with artificial intelligence. But we have a part to play in this as well. And this is my concern with the Caribbean, as with the convergence of all these that's happening: artificial intelligence, economic development, digital transformation. The question is no longer access. We have access to education. The question is whether education can adapt before the future arrives. And for me, when I think about how we operate right now in terms of how we assess education, we're still looking at test scores, we're still looking at graduation rates, we're still looking at attendance, we're still looking at literacy. The problem with that is that they are all lagging indicators. The moment we start talking about what's the test scores, who's failing, the ship has really left the harbor already. The reality is that we need to be thinking about what are the causes of those things. So for me, one of the sciences that we developed as some thought leaders is the science of convergence, structure, discovery. And what we're really looking at is what are the under earth circumstances or convergent forces that's influencing where we're going as a people. So for example, the fact that we're talking about how we react to AI means that we weren't looking in the original of what were the convergent forces. What we basically looking at is looking at the after effects. So when we talk about what were the convergent forces, this is an example, right? So when I look at, for example, meteorology, the whole idea of where we're going is that structure always becomes visible before outcomes. When we look at test scores and those things, we're looking at outcomes, but we're not looking at the structure that came before it. So in meteorology, the atmosphere structure comes before the storm, right? In terms of debt structures, the 2008 debacle we had with the financial structure, that just didn't happen. They were under there were convergent forces that was going on before that people who should have qualified should not have qualified. People were making bad loans at those point in times, and then it happened. So what I want to stress is that education conditions changes as well, because there's a performance collapse before the performance collapse as well. So my concern is what's under the iceberg. When we look at the top of the iceberg, we normally call this subterranean crisis. But when we look at this, when we look at what is happening and the challenges we have in education, especially in the Caribbean, we are looking at a fraction of what is happening, right? We are looking at the test scores, we're looking at literacy, we are looking at graduation rate. But at the bottom of that is economic stress, governance capability, institutional trust. You lose institutional trust and it's problematic. You have technology access. These are the convergent forces that's basically forming our future in the Caribbean. And I think those are the things that we need to talk about. So one of the questions that came up to us is, can we discover the conditions under which education failure forms before education failure becomes visible? Wanted to give you an example quickly. This is by far our major problem in the Caribbean. Just look at these numbers for 1 second, right? In 2019, our scores declined from 2019 to 2024, the math scores declined from 64% to 36%. We can't talk about anything in terms of cognitive movement for our Caribbean unless we understand this. But unless you say this was COVID, I want you to be very careful that they were all convergent forces before this came about in 2019. You had the cognitive compression, the shift from understanding to memorization of knowledge. You had workforce relevance. Are the things that we teach on campus, is it basically relevant to what workers want? You have teacher capability. This is a problem that has been plaguing the Caribbean from ever since. Teacher capability compression, insufficient pedagogical capability. The fact that we have this myth that we can do math. Well, if we have that myth as students, we can do math. The teachers also have that myth as well. You also have the digital economy, and you had COVID that basically unearthed everything. But these were the convergent forces that happened before 2019. So now we are in a state of beyond what we call 0 day. If you look at this dotted line, everything to the hash area is we are basically doing autopsy on a ghost. We really are, because the problem has occurred already where we had this whole opportunity. If you look at the curve that's going up right, you had teacher burnout, economic stress, technology, but at the top, we're still hip, hip, hooray. Test scores are great, attendance are great, graduation are great, literacy are great, but underneath you have all these forces that's compressing. that the moment we move, if you look at the blue line that moved precipitously down, that was from 2019 to 2024. That was the drop in. That's when everybody became alarmed. And so the Caribbean is an alarm right now as to what do we do about these test scores. But no one was guarding the guard. We have a Calypso in Trinidad who's going to guard the guards. No one was guarding the guards. No one was looking under the iceberg. So for me, I think artificial intelligence is one of the tools that we could use, because I firmly believe that artificial intelligence, we're asking the wrong question. The question we have been asking in the Caribbean is, how do we use this in the classroom? I don't think that that's where artificial intelligence is for us as a society. What we really need to understand is, how do we move from a rearview mirror capability to an anticipatory reader? How do we beforehand? How do we understand that teachers are basically beginning to burn out? How do you know that? Because you might be looking at a neighborhood, and a neighborhood attrition, rent may have gone up, or property value may have gone up, and people can't afford it, so they may be moving. So you're looking at all these signals before you move forward. So here is the main thesis. The main thesis is that, look, and when I talk about SDG 4, this is really important beyond the Caribbean, because SDG 4 is Sustainable Development Goals that the UN established in 2015. But if you think about 2015 to now, this is where we are. When 2015, we weren't talking about using artificial intelligence. We weren't talking about ChatGPT. We weren't talking about all these convergent forces. To me, the greatest value to education in the Caribbean is not in the classroom. It's the discovering future of education systems before it arrives. And that is what we would try. Doc, you talk a little bit about what we did in Antigua, but this is what we did in Antigua. When I went into Antigua in 2020, height of the recession, I went to help start as director of academic affairs and the dean of academic affairs. My thought was, how do we use artificial intelligence to move the country? The first thing I heard when I arrived in Antigua is that the prime minister said he wants Antigua and Barbuda to be an economic force in the Caribbean by 2030. I mean, I basically said, if this is the only government that's paying for our institutions, because as you know, most UE institutions are paid for by 17 governments. The prime minister decided he's going to pay. So what we decided to do is to say, okay, let's develop the first school of science, computing, and artificial intelligence. Why? Because he cannot move to an economic force unless he has the workforce that promotes that and supports them. Because you cannot, no one of our island could move forward with 60% of our GDP being in tourism. So you have to have industries that make you compete. But the next thing we did was to establish the Caribbean's first AI research conference. 1,100 people from 20 different countries. We had the vice president of Microsoft, vice president of Meta, vice president of IBM. We had vice president of GlaxoSmithKline. And these are all Caribbean representatives. The idea is that we could bring Caribbean leaders together to talk about the digital revolution of the Caribbean. So here is an example of where we were thinking about state first, because as Caribbean leaders and as Caribbean governments, we cannot wait until this happens in order to make a movement.
Could I have you to pause here, please, so we can go on to the next speaker, because you get into the details we don't want to really address right now. You
Sure.
actually have set it up nicely, because you're focused on the Caribbean, but as Caribbean people living in America, I dare say that Dr. Shauna Knox will say, what you're saying for the Caribbean is exactly the same thing I've been saying here in America.
Yes.
And so I'm going to ask Dr. Knox to pick up and talk about what her work, the Emancipation Game, is all about. And so as Dr. Quinado is a historian, as a historian in the group, and the Maroon in the group, and one of the reasons why I asked him, because as a Maroon, his culture and his memetic memory is different from ours who are not in that cultural space. As I want him to listen, to kind of hear, to come back to the question that Dr. Akasi was thinking through, is how do we then, Dr. Charles is talking about anticipation, which is, as a futurist, I'm concerned with. Dr. Akasi said we have to go back to fetch. Now, Dr. Knox, take us to what the work that you're doing here in America to address the gaps that Dr. Charles talked about in the Caribbean, but are the same and even worse here.
Thank you, Dr. Nelson, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Dr. Shauna Knox, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Emancipation Group. And we're an innovation studio that builds digital products for Black children and families to enter into intergenerational wealth. Um, I ended up in this AI conversation by accident, like I end up in most places. And I would say it's because I started asking a question, the same question that drove me into curriculum, and curriculum theory is my area of expertise. And that was who is sort of deciding what can be known and what is worth knowing about. Found myself in college having really focused on everything Black that I could find to focus on, including international studies with a concentration in Africa. I was studying Swahili, just doing everything I could to learn as much as I could about my people. And realizing that though I had come really close, really proximate, been able to take a Caribbean studies class here or there, for the most part, I had learned European history. And then I learned American history, and then I learned about the history of the European telling of the history of the African continent. But hardly would that be my entire history. And I started to ask the question, if I now have been in school for this long, and I haven't found a way to circle into my own personal history, is that a thing that's coming? Is that something that I get to do? Or do some people get to learn about their history and some people not get to learn about your history? And then what are the psychosocial, neurological implications of never having done that? And so I ended up doing a PhD specifically on that, and found that that thing that happens to you, to your brain, when you learn about yourself, it's called self-referencing. And it's actually a critical component of what it takes to develop critical thinking and problem solving, which are the foundational skills that undergird all the thinking that we do, and by extension, numeracy and literacy and all of the other things that allow us access into intergenerational wealth. And as a result, I too was really concerned about our apprehensions around mathematics, not necessarily as a global people, but looking specifically within the continental United States, where only 9% of Black children across this nation are actually ready to enter higher order math at a really critical juncture. And the research shows that if you're not ready for the higher order math at that time, not only won't you continue into a career that will allow you intergenerational wealth through more of that learning, but you might even avoid anything that requires some kind of prerequisite math in order to move on to doing what you're needing to do. And so we decided to make our first digital product. And again, we're a studio, we make several, a web-based video game that teaches you higher order math through episodes of Global Black History, because we're global Black people. And if you wanted to self-reference, then you would need to learn about yourself as a global entity and not as a result of a European hegemonic expedition. And so here is where the AI sort of entered my orbit. The person I was working with to develop this game had taught at Harvard for several years and literally wrote the book on learning games, resonant games. And the reason why we chose a game is because games, when really well designed, are able to significantly increase your critical thinking and problem solving, which for our students we would have to systematically address because they systematically have been removed from their learning curriculum. And so we've created a deficit in their critical thinking and problem solving. So I thought if we could get a game right, we could really do that well. And so with the capacity of AI allowing for a discursive learning pattern where you can not only think, but think alongside something else that's helping you think and giving us insight on the background about where your thinking is breaking down, it's just an incredible capacity that really has the opportunity to kind of close a gap that we feel really strongly about closing. And the person who is heading up our game design has won awards at Harvard, again, also a different person, specifically on building games, and has been building games for 15 years very successfully in the commercial sphere. And we knew that if we're going to use AI and we're going to do work that was explicitly Black, we would have to do some things to correct what was in the large language model, right? Because the large language model is almost like, think about it like nutrition facts, right? We don't know what's in the recipe. So we knew we don't know what's in there, but there's probably something in there that we're not going to want in the game. So we'll take some extra time, get some research assistance, and make sure that we're training out anything that would be harmful and inaccurate. And that just spun out into an entirely new body of work. Again, we're a research and development firm as well as a digital product development firm. So research is really critical to our work and the direction of what we do next. And what we found was a lot needed to be done next if we wanted this to truly be in service of our children. And so I think I'll pause here to say, Dr. Nelson, to your question about what is happening now, is that we need to be very thoughtful about the infrastructure of artificial intelligence insofar as how it informs, at least particularly our learning platforms, because we aren't aware of what's in the model cards, which is, again, very simply just the ingredients, the epistemologies of what is a Black person, right? That's why it's responding that way when you ask about John Russwurm. It has assumptions and it has decisions that won't be overridden by what you're saying to it, right? Because it's deeply been trained on a set of assumptions and truths that actually may not be true. And so part of the work that we are also doing, another product we're building, is what's called a retrieval augmented generation system. And you can just think about it as a sieve. If what's underneath it, that large language model, is telling a lie about who John is, what this will do, the thing that we are building, is it will actually correct for an inaccuracy before the answer spits up towards you. And we're working with Dr. Ivory Tolson at Howard University, who is curating the Journal of Negro Education, which has been around from the time of W.E.B. Du Bois. And he has written a seminal work, No Bad Statistics, in which he really doubles down on the way that there's deficit framing around Black people, that sometimes even when we use peer-reviewed work to check against inaccurate work that's just completely false, we're still not getting an accurate rendering of who we are, and that can't be the canon of what we tell our children. Or else we'll be moving from the problem I had, which is we're not even in this history at all, to a history that is actually not accurate at all. And so there's a critical inflection point right now for us to intervene, not just with product, but with infrastructure. And so that is what we do as well. We advise national philanthropies as well as school districts and anyone who is interested in safe and harm reduction in the space of AI, not just in the space of evaluation, where we were able to kind of see something is wrong with what it's spitting out. We can all see that, but that is not protection. That's just evaluation, at best acknowledgement, but also in the space of interception and correction. We build the technology that does that in a vendor agnostic way across all large language models.
Thank you so much. So we have come around to the question now that I've asked Dr. Kwesi Konado, who is known for his scholarship around African and transatlantic history of slavery and emancipation. Today's conversation is being held against the backdrop of a fear that I've been trying to express. And so this conversation with me is to help me kind of dampen my fear and recognize, yes, there are people doing the work that needs to be done, so I don't have to panic that nobody's doing it. And so, Dr. Kwesi, I'm asking to pick up from there. As a historian that's also trying to create the present, how are you using AI, or how are you viewing AI, or what do you anticipate to do with AI or not, in order to ensure that the history that you have studied and written about is consumed and regurgitated in the way in which you intended? Because if Dr. Charles is trying to say to the governments in the Caribbean region, and all of us who were born in the Caribbean know that we learned history first and foremost, that we were an enslaved people, and we know nothing about our history before then, right? That's the first thing. We also have a lot of assumptions, as Dr. Knox says, about who we are, and this is why we see today people in Jamaica still bleaching their skin. There's an assumption that somehow lighter skin equates to more knowledge and opportunity. And so even those of us who are in the diaspora trying to do work back home find ourselves butting up against this truth that is embedded. And so if we're going to promote AI here in America for our children, Black and brown children here in America of Caribbean heritage and of African-American heritage by extension, because many people are intermarrying into that space, then what does that mean? So Dr. Kwesi, I'd love to hear from you, and then we're going to open the floor. I'd love to have you reflect, and I'd love to hear more about how the film that you've been working on is going to help us shape the public perception. So Dr. Kwesi, the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, the organizers and panelists. So I'm not actually working on a film per se, but I think I was in conversation with you about a film by Mantia Diawara. It was a conference in Germany that I was in conversation with him about the film, um, and called AI, but he framed it as African intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And to me, that's as a jumping off point for much of what's been discussed so far. I think, like in history, history is an interpretation. History doesn't give truth, it doesn't give lessons. And some of my students push back against that, but it doesn't give lessons. What history does, it offers an interpretation, offers a perspective. And much of that depends upon our framing devices. So I think it's really, when it comes to AI, it's about how we frame, those two characters, right? Is it artificial intelligence, which means whatever the machine learning and languages do in terms of gobbling up, large stores of data and evaporating water sources and landfills and contributing to soil erosion and all the other, net negative consequences for our environment? Or is it ancestral intelligence? Or is it African intelligence? Or is it ancient intelligence, right? So I think first and foremost, I think we should have, and I say we, lowercase we, have a sense of, okay, what is the framing device through which we're operating, right? Much like an operating system in a computer. What's our framing device? And once we can settle on, by way of some general, baseline understanding of what our framing devices are, then we can ask the appropriate historicized question. So for example, John Ruskin didn't invent the newspaper. What he did, he framed a particular newspaper for a purpose, right? And so the framing device to me is always crucial as sort of a priori before we do anything else in terms of either educational outcomes in the Caribbean or student learning, or is it working in the gaming and digital, media space, or in terms of documentary, other kinds of filmmaking. It's what's our framing device, right? Because everything has to land within a particular frame. Historians call this emplotment. That is, how do we fit something in a plot, right? What's the plotting device? And excuse me if I'm freezing up. Um, let's see. Yeah, I froze for a moment. So I'm actually in Jamaica right now. So yeah, thanks. Yeah, so no, what's the framing device that's going to put us in a plot, a particular, storyline in terms of where we're headed to. And so if it is ancient intelligence, then we see machine learning as simply tools without a soul, because it's called artificial intelligence for a reason. It doesn't have a soul, right? It doesn't have the sort of humanity that we on this panel and those who are joining us wherever they are in the world have. And I think that's very important about the human side of this equation. That I think sometimes we yield our humanity to these devices and these gadgets as if these gadgets have a soul. They don't have a soul, right? The same way that Harvard produces much of the world, millionaires, it produces much of the world crooks and thieves, right? And so um, question we ask then is, okay, what is the soul of Harvard, right? What is the soul institution that's producing these kinds of outputs and kinds of devices and kinds of gadgets? And as an historian, I look at human history as, what is the ways in which people have moved through their cultures and along their histories with a certain kind of soul. And this goes back to somebody that I love, which is W.E.B. Du Bois, right? Who has a book that everyone that they haven't read should read over and over, called The Soul of Black Folks. And in it, Du Bois argued very clearly that history, the soul, right, of a people is the engine of history. That's what moves them through. However, if we surrender that soul to an algorithm, to machine learning, to a certain data point, right, in terms of outcomes, then I think we miss the very important strategies that are implicit in when the world is getting too digital. Sometimes we need to go analog, right? One of the best places to be in this point of this time that we're living in is in the mountains, right? And it's always been. That's why my folks, in west part of Ireland, in a place called Akompong, western part of Jamaica, Paris, St. Elizabeth, that's what my Maroon folks are from. They're in the mountains for a reason. And for those of you that are into the world of biblical studies, know that mountains are not only sacred but key places of recourse and refuge and reconsideration, so we can plot and plan and execute. And so, right now, I think that the framing devices we use is the first things we need to consider before looking at either outcomes, looking at deploying certain kinds of tools, and even our partnerships, across, the African Black world that we seek to either engender or strengthen or make anew, because that to me will be the crucial, context for whatever work that we plan to do.
Thank you so much for that entry. So here we are, there are 4 different perspectives, looking from different angles of the same ecosystem, because the fact is we are now embedded in an ecosystem that we can't get out. Yes, we might turn off the phone for a short time, but we are now embedded in a system also where the history of the future we thought we were writing has now been transformed in the last 12 and 18 months. None of us anticipated last January that the Department of Education would be decimated. None of us anticipated 18 months ago that certain Black books would be banned. So the future that we were writing up until January 2025 no longer exists. And so this idea of anticipation, this idea of futures thinking, futures literacy is something that I, as a futurist, one of the reasons why I call this the John Russell Futures Dialogue or Dialogue on the Future is because we're used to, yes, we have to remember our history, but if we're not remembering our future through the lens of anticipation, we might find ourselves reacting, which is what Dr. Charles is talking about, that lag between the education system. But Dr. Charles, as a technologist, I know you have been largely focused on the how to of technology. But as you're listening to this, I want you to start reflecting, but what if the Caribbean is using this AI LLMs, which are built on the outside, and nobody is teaching the Caribbean governments how to build their own? We're just perpetuating the same stereotypes that have kept us in a negative space. I'd love to hear from Ms. Huggins, Eureka Huggins, as somebody who is a cultural practitioner, what thoughts have come up for her as she has been listening to this. Also, given her work in the international development arena, where, bringing scholars back and forth from Africa to America to learn the American democracy. And now we find the myth of the American democracy is shattering in front of our very eyes. So we no longer have to pretend that it is complete. We see it is still reforming in ways that might do us more injury. So Dr. Akasi, from your vantage point, having heard from the other 3 speakers, how do you think your film and your book, because the film we hope is going to get some eyes, how do you think your film is going to begin to have us begin to think differently about how we respond from a place of power rather than with fear to what the environment we're currently in? The floor is yours, Dr. Akasi.
Yeah, so as I was listening to the powerful what Dr. Kwesi just said, I mean, it was just beautifully said, and I appreciate that. And so I deeply appreciate those remarks, because I particularly was struck by the emphasis on the framing devices and the soul of people, and thinking about how that connects to the film as well. So when I think about the film and what was just said and what all the colleagues had said as well, we need to look at, of course, we're looking at it when we think about STEM, but the humanities lens of it is so crucial. And that's what is focused in the documentary. And I put a link to the YouTube version of it, but it will be on PBS as well. But when I was at Howard University, And I recently accepted a position at another institution as Dean and Executive Director of Academic Center of Excellence, and also as professor. But when I was at Howard as director just recently, we had an AI advisory board. And in our department, we were working on it as well. But in the English department at Howard, we emphasize the importance of the humanities. So I argue that artificial intelligence itself is not the center of the story. Artificial intelligence is a tool, but the tools do not possess souls, as you have mentioned. People do, and algorithms, they don't dream, people do, right? But we have to be very careful, though, because we know the history of colonialism. Right. And if you get into the colonial imaginary today with AI, this is very dangerous. We have faulty facial recognitions. We're using it to determine who gets a loan in the USA to get a house. We're even using it in the medical field to try to diagnose. But if the algorithms being plugged in do not look like me or you sitting at the table, we are in trouble, because it is determining who gets the scholarships, who gets accepted into the universities, right? But if we're looking at it through a Eurocentric gaze, if those algorithms being plugged in is through a Eurocentric gaze and lens, it's history repeating itself. So now we're into techno-colonialism, techno-racism, techno-sexism, and the list goes on and on. So the question that we end with within this, and what we argue through the documentary, and there's renowned AI scholars from all over, and we definitely need to do a part 2 to it. And so the question that that we're focusing on, especially with this, is AI perhaps is the greatest challenge of our generation in modern history, because it's ensuring that intelligence itself becomes an instrument of human flourishing, right? Rather than another mechanism for reproducing old inequalities. So perhaps the unfinished work of emancipation in the 21st century, as we explore, is ensuring that intelligence itself, human and artificial, serves justice, dignity, and flourishing of all people. So the struggle before us is not simply technological, as we argue in the documentary, it is civilizational. It is about who gets to define knowledge, whose humanity is reflected in our machines, and whether the future will remember the wisdom of our ancestors as it imagines the possibilities of tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. So I want to go to what I call solutionary, because I really don't like to talk a lot about the problems, and we don't at least begin to think about what can we do. I am not an AI expert, but I certainly have a platform, and as someone who is focused on space and AI in space and AI equity and digital transformation, I want to get some guidance from Dr. Knox, from yourself, from Dr. Kwesi and Dr. Charles. And Eureka is here as a person I respect deeply for the work she's done over the years to have us bring spirituality into our conversation as a people who now must be part of the shaping of the future. We have to be intentional about what we want to shape. So as you think about the question in this last round, we're about 20 minutes to closing. I want us to use this next 20 minutes to think through and talk about what can we do. We may not be able to change the law directly, but what are the tools and the assets we have at our disposal? And I don't know if I should ask Dr. Charles to start first, because he started talking about the Caribbean region. But knowing, I know about the Caribbean region, right? And knowing what you know, having worked there, changing the Caribbean is very hard. But the diaspora does have impact in terms of, we have all these alumni associations that are very active over here. So from your side, I want you to think back on your work so far and take the ministry out of it, because you can't change any ministry in the Caribbean. You can't, right? But I was very fascinated by what you presented. I've never seen it before. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe this presentation should be adapted for all of these diaspora organizations in the education space that are providing scholarships and providing computer labs and books, etc., to their school libraries. So help us think through that. But I'm going to go to Dr. Knox first because I want to find out more about this game. And maybe that can get us something we can do at our little personal level, especially those of us on the call who may not have any children in school, but they have grandchildren. Tell us more about your game. Let's start with that, and then Dr. Charles, we go to more the bigger system. Dr. Knox, your game.
I'm going to disobey you, Dr. Nelson, and talk
Okay.
about the larger infrastructure just because it's
Okay.
much more important
Disobey
than the
me.
game. Yes, I'm taking a liberty, and it's because of this. I think we have always been an ingenious people. We always figure out how to do what we need to do, and usually we have to play small because we have to do things incrementally, and that's just the reality of the situation. And most of the studies have borne out that when we do business, we're very good at doing business, and our business is sustained. We are ethical practitioners. We hire within our communities. We uplift our ecosystems. It is good. The challenge here would be to.
Oh, wow. She got disconnected. Hope she'll get back in. And that's a challenge because I'm having a challenge bringing people in. Maybe she had a power cut. This is DC. In Washington, D.C., we have power cuts. So, Dr. Charles, the floor is yours while we wait on her to come back.
Do you want me to go ahead?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes. So for me, I'm bullish on AI, and for a lot of reasons. We talk about just now how you form. I mean, I'm formed based on my training at MIT and based on my work in technology in some of the larger tech firms. So for me, I think that for the diaspora, we are living through one of the greatest period on the face of the earth. And I want to coin that also. If I look at it from the Caribbean, most people say, well, we're from small islands. Well, we're all from an island. We're surrounded by water. The reality is that smallness is so much as an advantage right now that we have the ability to transform this and do what I talk about for the Caribbean. We need to creolize this technology so that it becomes ours. And I think that's what we need to do. If we could creolize the technology and don't just accept the fact that this is what we have. With Dr. Knox just now, I totally agree. I think we're one of the most ingenious people on the face of the earth. The issue that we have with AI right now is that we weren't there at the beginning. Okay, we weren't there at the beginning. That's okay. But we could take this and basically transform it to us. Now that we're in the game and we're much more aware, we have to come back to the point that I talked about with the Caribbean. Having your math scores drop from 60 something to 30 something in 4 years is a problem to compete in this AI region because you have to have the cognitive knowledge in order. You have to have this multidiscipline, but you have to have the cognitive skills to write the codes and stuff like that. So for me, I think that if we could focus on what we could do and how we could transform this technology, then I think we could be successful because now we're talking about, okay, the AI algorithm doesn't reflect who we are. All right, let's change that. Let's train programmers who could now program the large language models and make sure that they have the data sets that the top companies are using, use the same data sets because of the African people and the diaspora, and basically turn this around. I mean, listen, you had to have the audacity when we started in 2021, the School of Science, Computing, and Artificial Intelligence. Small Antigua and Barbuda, right? Small Antigua. We're not Jamaica, we weren't Barbados, we weren't Trinidad. So we were thinking that because we're small, we have the audacity of hope. So to basically be in this region where we are right now, and I'm using region globally as a people, to think that we have no recourse to transform this technology, I think it bothers me, because it bothers me tremendously, because I know the power of our people, and I know the power of this technology. I have been a university president, and I've been an executive at the tech companies. So I know both worlds. We have the greatest opportunity in front of us to move our people forward and catapult where we have been and have that control. And I firmly believe that I firmly believe that the opportunity of a lifetime is had in the lifetime of that opportunity. We have an opportunity of a lifetime right now, and we need to grab that bull by the horn and ride it.
Dr. Nas, jump back in.
Yes, I couldn't agree with you more, Dr. Charles. That's just the truth, frankly. And what I was trying to say about our business acumen is what it can't do is make up for the gap in where in the business ecosystem we decide to kind of stake our claim. And so if we're at the very end of the line just producing products, we won't be able to participate in the incredible wealth transfer that is sure to come with this frontier technology at the site of infrastructure, at the site of where these distribution channels that everyone will be reliant on, and making sure that if we can't individually buy in that space, that then we collectively strategize and do something together in that space, but that we don't allow ourselves to be locked out of it, because if history holds, we will never make up the gap. And I think that there's an intellectual shift also necessary there. I've appreciated the discussion about decoloniality, and as a decolonial curriculum theorist, I'm very much a part of that line of thinking. And I think what's helpful to note is, in 2005 there was a website that decided to do a chess competition, and they allowed you to participate as a human, you could participate as a machine, or a human and machine hybrid team. And in 2005, they found that grandmasters in chess, that means you are the best, you are the highest skilled in chess, right? They did not win that competition. The folks who won the competition were two men who ranked pretty low on their skill level in chess, but worked in tandem with the machine. So it's the combination of human directionality and the capacity of the machine won the competition. That was 2005. In 2026, the machine is going to win every time. The machine is winning every time in 2026 because chess is a closed circuit. It's narrow and it's fixed. It has learned all the moves from human ingenuity, and now it knows how to win a chess game. The economy is not a chess game. There are open variables, and we'll always have the edge, because there will always need to be human direction. The direction needs to be more than should we participate or should we not participate. Our participation will be sure. Either we'll be participating as indentured and perpetually in debt and perpetually behind, or we'll be participating as folks who took on the frontier and decided that, notwithstanding where we've been epigenetically predisposed to wait a little bit to see if something's safe, to be a bit suspicious, in this moment, we have to jump, and we have to jump early. And we can't jump being the grandmasters in the chess because this board is still forming. We have to be willing to jump in with an emergent and nascent understanding that if we don't jump now, our children will be behind in a way that they can't catch up. So even if that's uncomfortable, we will need to move forward in the reality of where we find ourselves. And that can't just be a short-term play of setting up a shop that is digital. We need to set up an ownership of an entire ecosystem that we own, understanding the headwinds that are against us as Black people who are unapologetically Black and will be continuing to be Black. Our children and their children will continue to be Black. We actually understand what is against us, and so we need to kind of operate like other groups of people that I will not name in this moment, who have recognized that the headwinds will continue to perpetually be against them, and have decided that they will own enough capital that regardless of where the headwinds blow, they will be standing.
Thank you so much. When you said set up a shop, I immediately went to the patty shop. The patty shop, Jamaicans have a way of saying, you think of patty shop business. And so a lot of people are caught up in the conversation about patty shop. But Yurka Huggins, I see your hand up. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. This is such a great conversation. I mean, it's coming at you very fast. Just very briefly, ADASI is our organization. It's the Education, Cultural, Spiritual organization dedicated to commemorating our ancestors who perished in the Middle Passage, the Ma'afa, as well as those who survived. And so we do that through many different ways. We present scholars, artists, activists. One of the question that I would ask you would be, how do we address this from a spiritual perspective? We know in Adasi we do work around healing, remembrance, and healing, and how the epigenetics are played into our daily lives. That what is passed on from generation to generation. How do we heal? How do we tap into that? How we tap into our AI, our ancestral intelligence? From a spiritual perspective, how are we able to address and see AI, the impact of this artificial intelligence, to what benefit? How do we continue to remind our children that the drums are so important and critical to us? It's our heartbeat. How do we not forget? How do we toe that line? So I'm putting the questions out to you because you all are the experts. We on a different side, but I think we all want the same for our people, basically, and we understand who we are.
Yes, go ahead. Dr. Akasa, go ahead.
Yeah, so I that was so beautifully said, and it reminds us, and I think we need to remember, algorithms do not pray. Algorithms can't pray, and algorithms, they don't love, and algorithms, they can't dream, right? But people do, we do, and we have a lot of our information from our ancestors, from the griots and so forth. And I appreciate your phrase ancestral intelligence. I think that's very important because I believe it reminds us that intelligence did not begin with machines, we know. And long before there was artificial intelligence, it came about in the 1950s. People thinking it's a phenomenon, it just happened in 2022. No, this goes back to the 1950s, right? But long before the AI, there was indeed ancestral intelligence. There was wisdom, there was memory, there was spirituality, there was storytelling, there was rhythm with the drums and this language, and there was community. There was prayer, and there was the drum, the talking drum. And as a woman of faith, and as the author and film creator of AI Unveiled, I do not believe that artificial intelligence threatens our humanity unless we suffer from what Dr. Malefico Santi calls cultural amnesia. Okay, so I think we have to be careful not to forget and to challenge. And because AI can process information, it cannot inherit a grandmother's prayer, right? It cannot feel the vibration of the drum. It can't mourn, it doesn't have empathy. It cannot forgive. It cannot worship. It cannot love. So those are profoundly human experiences that can never be replaced. And so when we speak about healing, I think healing begins with remembrance. The Akan principle of Sankofa teaches us that we must go back and retrieve what is valuable from the past in order to move wisely into the future, right? So healing requires memory, healing requires community, healing requires storytelling, and healing requires spiritual grounding. So with that being said, I think science increasingly recognizes that trauma can have effects across generations, and that healing environments matter. So, but our ancestors understood something long before the science caught up, right? They understood that people heal in community. I am because we are. They heal through ritual. They heal through song. They heal through faith. They heal through love. And so perhaps that is what I hear, especially when you speak about our ancestral intelligence, I hear wisdom accumulated across generations. I hear resilience and survival. I hear all of that. And so I think to end, we must again remember that before there was data, and I'll end with this, before there was data, there was rhythm. And before there were algorithms, there were stories and our griots. And before there was machine learning, there was human learning. So before there was AI, there was ancestral intelligence. And perhaps the future belongs not to those who forget, but to those who, in this panel right now, who remember. And we have to make sure we continue to get a seat at the table or build our own. And that's why I love what the sister, Dr. Knox, is doing, because and with my beloved Howard University, because that's so vitally important, because AI hallucinates. And if we're not careful, especially with our students, they'll buy into that. And now the colonial imaginary, that techno imaginary continues as a vicious cycle. You type in African American, Google slips up, and you go to Google image, you'll see a monkey come up. This is not a technical glitch. This is intentional. So we have to continue to challenge it and to bring it forefront. And as a law student currently, there's a lot of lawsuits that are coming down. The more that we continue to enlighten people on this, there are a lot of lawsuits that are happening because of AI right now for that reason, and faulty facial recognition. Thank you.
I wanted to just say this about, and I'm going to ask Dr. Kwasi to come in, because if we talk about memory, but here's the challenge that I think, Dr. Curtis Charles, as you begin to talk to institutions in the Caribbean and even here in America, we do have a tradition of Black private schools. So maybe you can start with them, because, sometimes in the Caribbean, people have to see it over here in America first before they buy it back home. So maybe we can have you maybe go to a meeting of some of the Black private schools and after school programs to kind of begin to have this discourse, and working with Dr. Knox, come up with something we can do. But what I'm thinking is that for these kids who don't have a history, we understand what happened during COVID, right? They become what one of my friends who has children says the children became more to themselves. They like to be in their room with the door closed. They like to be on the internet and talking on text. They don't play with others that well in physical reality, because those 2 years of shutdown have changed their mindset. So think about those people who were elementary school students in the years of COVID, and then those who are just being born today. How do we, Dr. Kwasi, you are Maroon, you are involved in history telling and storytelling, as you say, framing stuff. What things could we be thinking about now, and based on your practice, to ensure that we do make the spaces for that memory and history to be passed on? Because again, if they're in front of a screen all the time and their teachers are telling them, go to the screen to learn your history, and that history is already warped, then how are we going to make this happen? Do you have any ideas? Or how do we then retrain AI and support the work that Dr. Knox is doing, so we have our own platform that can go to hear the real deal? Because something has to be different. Your thoughts?
Sure thing. I'll keep it to maybe 3 points. So one is that there's, for example, the African Languages Lab. And the African Languages Lab, they're working with 12 or I think a dozen or so African languages in terms of not simply coding them, but actually structuring them to fit the cultural algorithm of the people who speak those languages. And so I was a computer science major as an undergrad, by the way. And so, froze upon you. Hopefully I can unfreeze. All right. Yeah, so I was a computer science major when I was an undergrad. And so I'm very much familiar with sort of the back end, of much of our discussion. And I'll tell you that, so the language we dream in, we imagine in, for example, I think Dr. Knox studies Kiswahili. I do too. Habari yako. And so, when I started learning African languages, I speak Tree, Little Yoruba, and Kiswahili. Once you start dreaming in the language, you know, your brain, your cognitive structure rewires, right? So I'm using it as a metaphor to say that there has to be a way in which through homeschooling, through private schooling, through other kinds of technologies and media, like the documentary, the apps, the video games, and even more, much more, is to really surround like a field, surround our young people and the older ones as well, you know, within a cluster of sort of, you know, healthy community institutional habits, right? That limit the screen time, that maximize human contact time. As you all remember, this movie called I, Robot, Will Smith. And there's a scene where he and the young girl, 12 years, I think, off the bridge, and they jump in the car in the water. The robot jumps in the water and goes to save Will Smith, the adult, not the child. And the robot argues that, well, you have a better chance, you being the adult have a better chance to survive. Will Smith said, no, 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 I want the child to survive, right? This is something that I think we often misappreciate about artificial intelligence, is that not only robots don't have a soul, their decision making, right, is not the ways in which humans are wired, right? In terms of the cognitive structures, the cultural structure, and the spiritual structures, right? Because anyone knows from this panel that if that was you and your child, you're going for the child in the water, regardless of who has a better survival rate, right? And the idea is that either we survive together or we don't together, right? And so there's something about how we become data points that we have to push back on, so that our wiring, our cultural wiring, becomes essentially our analog, you know, algorithm that combats the digital algorithm that feeds on us as data, right? And I think that will be probably the second effort between parents, communities, elders, and all those people that are involved, to get them, again, framing. We have to get on board with at least some sense of a framing device that's going to help us make decisions that will allow us to fight back against all the things that my wonderful panelists have talked about before.
Thank you so much. So we've come to the end of our conversation. I do want to allow, if anybody in the audience has a question. I did see a note. Let me just read that out. Somebody said that there needs to be a reframing of history versus our story, because there's a lot of anti-intellectualism and discrediting of historians and archaeologists of African heritage. Exactly. This is where we are. We're in a sort of a pushback. The experiment of, certainly in America, the experiment of becoming an ever more perfect union through the civil rights movement and the era of DEI, etc., has been definitely closed off because of the fragility of our quote unquote former enslaved and colonizers. But the reality is that the global majority around the world, and we see how China has repositioned itself in less than 50 years. We see how India, through its space race, has been able to reposition itself as well. And we see now Africa trying in very different ways to organize around taking back the wealth and redirecting the question of what it means to be poor. Who is poor? And I always said, as someone who worked in development, that indigenous peoples in Americas were very able to regain the language. And they always used to say when they came to Washington, D.C., don't call us poor. We're not poor. That's your word. That's not our word. And I really hope that we, as people of African descent, can begin to do that more intentionally. Stop accepting that, oh, Africa is a poor continent. It's not a poor continent, right? It has a lot of riches. It has rich people, rich endowments of mineral wealth, and, you know, fruits and animals and all the other biodiversity it has. The question is, the economic systems and frameworks in which we currently exist have not allowed us to benefit from that wealth in an equal or equitable way. And so as we look towards seeing this particular moment in history, and I'm waiting to see if somebody else puts up their hand, my challenge is that I am not able to bring anybody up, but if you can put the thing in the chat, I probably can read it. If you're having a question, please post it in the chat. I'm not sure if Charmaine is still able to respond to people if you put your hand up to allow you to speak, because I'm not able to do that. But attendees, now is the time if you have anything to add. Any last words for our speakers or panelists? Your last opportunity to opine on something before we close out.
Just want to demystify one thing that we use. We use the word algorithm all the time, and algorithms are nothing more than directions. And if there are any people on the face of the earth that masters algorithm, it's probably Caribbean people, right? So I'm traveling to, let's say I'm in Trinidad, and I'm trying to get to the hospital. And I stopped to ask for directions, right? Algorithms. And the guy would say, you know what? You see that breadfruit tree down there? When you reach the breadfruit tree, make a right. And when you make that right, you're going to see Miss Mary shop, patty shop. At Miss Mary patty shop, just make another left and go all the way down until you see the guy selling Kaimet. Once you see that guy selling Kaimet, make a left, and that will take you right to the hospital. Algorithms are nothing more than directions. And we are great at giving directions. So when you hear the word algorithms, don't get scared, because the reality is that a human being, we're talking about a soul, a human being is given those directions. We have a saying where we say architecture before algorithms. Think about AI and think about algorithms as just another tool. As an architect, I think about algorithms just like pipes or electricity within your building. It is not the building, it is not the soul. But don't get tied up next thing, you know, because we on these panels and we talk about algorithm a lot. And every time I hear the word, I think about, man, growing up home, you can't get lost. Somebody gonna tell you something. And you know, go down by the breadfruit tree, make a right, make a left. Those are algorithms. It's directions. And somebody have to give the direction who has a heartbeat.
Thank you so much. Anybody else wants to close out?
Yeah, I think along that
I
line, I'll
just
just
say
add that.
before there was artificial intelligence, there was ancestral intelligence and African intelligence. And before there were algorithms, there was rhythm. So may we build technologies that never forget our humanity, our roots, our memory, and our soul. Thank you.
Dr. Knox?
Thanks, Dr. Nelson. I would just say, along the lines of what Curtis just said, you know, if we genuinely accept that this is just a tool, you know, we wouldn't in any way be concerned about the imbuing of values from a tool. Because if we're going to use a hammer, we're never asking what the hammer would like to use itself to do, right? It's just the value of the hammer is what we are able to build with it. And so the opportunity here is for us to build and for us to use our own ingenuity to determine how we're going to use a tool, no matter how smart the tool is. A hammer is a tool, a refrigerator is a tool that's doing something even fancier than what a hammer can do, but all it can do is within its circuit. And so this is a moment for continuity of our own ideas, for valuing our own proximity to problems that we've already wanted to solve, and trusting that we are closest to the solution because we are closest to those problems, and because we spent a lot of time trying to understand problems and articulate problems and persuade about problems, and we find ourselves now in position to address them. And so that should be our positionality moving forward.
Thank you. Dr. Kwasi?
Sure, I'll keep it short and sweet. God's children should never fear dying for what they believe.
Miss Huggins, Eureka.
Sure. Remember the ancestors. Remember to continue to draw upon their strength, their courage, their wisdom, their determination. Remember, as we restore our memory, we will remember that we are divine. Thank you.
Thank you. So somebody's asking, can the panelists provide links and resources and the best practice? So please, in the chat, please post your websites, your links, so they can be in touch with you. And I will close out by saying this is not going to certainly be the last of this conversation. Apart from the Institute of Caribbean Studies, I run an NGO called, a research and development organization called the Futures Forum. And with the charge coming out of the UN Pact for the Future and the Abbas Accords, of the Small Island Developing States for digital transformation and the Global Digital Compact, I have decided that cyberspace and just futures in cyberspace must be one of the things that we do, especially we're so involved in ocean space and outer space. So when you look at those three guardrails of the future, we don't have a sea, we die. We don't manage outer space, we die. If we don't manage cyberspace, we die. And so therefore, for me, cyberspace will be one of the other spaces in which the Futures Forum, and therefore my work as a Caribbeanist and Caribbean Futures Forum, which we're developing, will participate. So let me close out by saying let us remember we are the creators. The machine is made in our image, and like every mirror, it reflects what stands before it. Our brilliance, our biases, our hopes, our fears, our exclusions, our possibilities. If injustice is embedded in the data, it will echo in the algorithm. If prejudice is encoded in the past, it will reappear in the machine. If entire peoples are absent from the story, they may disappear from the future. And which is why we might call now not just to be innovators, but to be responsible. We're called now not just to manage our intelligence, but also to provide wisdom, not just to efficiency, but to justice. It is a call for a day. And so in the spirit of John Brown Russwurm, who declared, we wish to plead our own cause, for too long others have spoken for us, we can now say that we understand emancipation is not an event, it's a journey. And that journey continues as we continue to speak for ourselves, recognizing that emancipation is still coming and it's still waiting for us to provide the answers. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to close out by sharing our national anthem, written by James Weldon Johnson, and something that we all love. James Weldon Johnson was of Bahamian heritage. And actually, let me just start over because I have a feeling that I didn't share the song. So let me start over. James Weldon Johnson is, let me share a song. There we go. James Weldon Johnson of Bahamian heritage wrote this beautiful hymn that has become what is called the Black National Anthem. It is being sung by Gerard Placide, and we have put on it many of our ancestors we honor. So we close with this tribute to our ancestors. And I want you to just, before you hang up, see how many of them you recognize. All right?
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let a rejoicing arise highest the listening sky. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening ride, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not a weary feet come in the place for which our side. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloomy past, till now we stand and last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of all wearies, God of all silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into thy light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places of God where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee, shadowed beneath thy hand. May we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you all for being with us today. I wish you all a wonderful day as you contemplate what we have learned. Thank to all my panelists for being part of the discussion. I've learned so much. You'll be hearing from me, each and every one of you. I want to continue to amplify your work and whatever we can do at the Institute of Caribbean Studies or the Futures Forum to ensure we're not left behind. Please count on us to do that. With that, friends, have a wonderful day. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.